Father, I implore you, intercede for my soul.
Child, receive this blessing. The Lord forgives. Receive this blessing.
I receive it with my whole heart.
History is full of quiet moments that later become loud storms. Some stories begin with a shout, an explosion of sound and fury that demands your attention. But others, the ones that often have the deepest impact, begin with a whisper in the dark. This story belongs to the second kind. The title might sound shocking, even sensational. 3 times in one night to end the Vatican watched. But this isn't a work of fiction or a wild fantasy. It's a real story, one that peels back the layers of power, rumor, hidden behavior, and moral conflict. It's a story about how powerful institutions, for better or for worse, go to great lengths to protect their image. For centuries, the Vatican has stood as one of the most watched and respected centers of faith and authority in the world. Millions of people place their trust in its leadership, its discipline, and its solemn promise of moral guidance. But as history has shown us time and time again, even the strongest, most sacred walls cannot hide every secret forever. Sometimes, the truth finds a way to seep through the cracks. This particular story is a chilling reminder of that fact. It is a tale that challenges what we think we know and forces us to look closer at the shadows that can gather even in the brightest of places. So what really happened on that fateful night? The whispers point to a specific event, a moment of chaos and moral collapse that was deliberately kept from the public eye. Imagine the scene. Within the hallowed grounds of the Vatican, a place seen as the bedrock of moral order, a series of shocking acts unfolded. The details that have trickled out over the years are disturbing. They paint a picture of individuals in positions of immense trust, engaging in behavior that completely contradicts the values they are sworn to uphold. We're talking about a level of decadence and hypocrisy that's hard to fathom. The phrase, 3 times in one night, isn't just a catchy headline. It refers to 3 distinct, scandalous incidents that allegedly took place in rapid succession. And the most unsettling part, the claim that the Vatican hierarchy was aware. They watched. They knew. But instead of immediate action, transparency, or accountability, the response was silence. A wall of silence designed to protect the institution's reputation, no matter the cost. This wasn't a failure of a few individuals. It was a systemic failure. A conscious decision was made to prioritize image over integrity, to bury a scandal rather than confront it. This is where the story moves from being about personal failings to being about the mechanics of institutional power and control. To understand how something like this could be covered up, you have to understand the Vatican itself. It's not just a religious center. It's a sovereign state with its own laws, its own bank, and its own intricate web of power dynamics that has been refined over 2,000 years. Secrecy is woven into its very fabric. The Vatican's secret archives, which aren't as secret as the name implies but are still incredibly difficult to access, hold centuries of documents. This culture of confidentiality, meant to protect the church and its flock, can also be used to conceal its darkest moments. When a scandal erupts, the first instinct is often to contain it, to handle it internally. This is done through a complex system of loyalty, obedience, and the understanding that the reputation of the church is paramount. Information is controlled. Those who might speak out are silenced, moved, or discredited. Rumors are dismissed as attacks on the faith. In this environment, a story as explosive as 3 times in one night can be effectively smothered before it ever reaches the public. The machine of the institution kicks into gear, not to find justice, but to restore order and maintain the facade of holiness and It's a powerful and often terrifyingly effective strategy. But secrets have a shelf life. In the modern age of information, even the Vatican's ancient walls are becoming more transparent. Whistleblowers, investigative journalists, and historians have started piecing together the fragments of these hidden stories. They dig through obscure documents, interview former insiders, and connect the dots that the institution tried so hard to erase. The 3 times in one night story is a product of this new era of scrutiny. It emerged from hushed conversations, leaked memos, and the brave testimony of those who could no longer stay silent. This story, and others like it, forces us to ask difficult questions. What is the true cost of this kind of secrecy? When an institution dedicated to moral truth actively conceals wrongdoing, what does that do to the faith of its followers? The conflict is profound. On one hand, you have the desire to protect a beloved institution from scandal. On the other, you have the moral imperative for truth and justice. These revelations create a crisis of faith for many, not in God, but in the human beings and the structures that claim to represent Him. It reveals the deep human fallibility that exists even in the most sacred of places. Ultimately, this story is more than just a shocking historical footnote. It's a powerful lesson about power, secrecy, and accountability. It shows that no institution, no matter how old, revered, or powerful, is immune to corruption or the temptation to hide its own flaws. But it also shows us the incredible power of the truth. Whispers that begin in the dark can, with time and courage, grow into a roar that demands to be heard. The story of 3 times in one night is a stark reminder that true strength doesn't come from projecting an image of perfection, but from having the courage to confront imperfection, to acknowledge wrongdoing, and to strive for genuine transparency and justice. The walls of the Vatican have witnessed centuries of history, and as we continue to uncover these hidden chapters, we get a more complete, more human, and ultimately more honest picture of one of the world's most enduring institutions. Every secret has its witnesses, even if they remain silent. Think about it. In the grand tapestry of our daily lives, there are threads that, when pulled, can unravel the most carefully constructed mysteries. It's not always about a smoking gun or a dramatic confession. Sometimes, the truth is pieced together from the quiet observations of those we barely notice. Let's imagine a scenario, a high-stakes corporate espionage case. The prize, a revolutionary tech blueprint with billions. The perpetrator, a ghost, seemingly leaving no trace. But the truth is, traces are always left behind. The first witness is a security officer, a man named Frank, who has worked the same shift for 15 years. He notices something small, almost insignificant. A particular key card is used to access a private service corridor more frequently than usual. It's not an alarm-tripping event, just a blip in the data. He logs it, a simple note in his digital report, and moves on. To him, it's just a minor anomaly, maybe a new employee getting lost. Then we have our second witness, Maria, a maintenance worker on the night shift. Her job is to ensure the building is pristine for the next day. As she makes her rounds, she sees things others don't. She notices a specific office door, one belonging to a high-level executive, slightly ajar at 2 a.m. She closes it, assuming it was an oversight. A few nights later, the same door is open again, and then again the following week. It's strange, because the executive is known for being meticulously organized, always the last one to leave and the first to lock up. Maria mentions it to a coworker in passing, a casual "that's weird" kind of comment. It doesn't go any further, but the observation is made. Our third witness is David, a young night clerk at the front desk. His primary role is to monitor the building's automated systems and log any unusual activity. The system records every door opening, every elevator call, every light turned on. David sees logs of movement in the R&D wing long after everyone should have gone home. The times don't match any approved overtime schedules. He flags it, as per protocol, but his report gets buried under a mountain of other routine system alerts. Individually, these details mean absolutely nothing. A curious security guard, a diligent cleaner, a bored night clerk. Their observations are just isolated dots on a massive canvas. They are just doing their jobs, unaware they are holding pieces of a much larger puzzle. But what happens when someone decides to connect these dots? An investigator, perhaps, who starts with a simple question. How could the data have been stolen? They start digging, not for a grand conspiracy, but for the tiny inconsistencies, the small deviations from the norm. They pull Frank's security logs and see the repeated access to the private corridor. It's LED. They look at Maria's anecdotal report, which leads them to the executive's office. Another lead. They sift through David's system logs and find the unscheduled activity in the R&D wing, which just happens to be accessible via that same service corridor. Frank flags. Suddenly, a pattern emerges from the noise. The corridor access, the open office door, the late-night activity in the R&D department, they all line up. The ghost now has a shape. The investigation can now focus on who had access to that specific key card, who could have plausibly been in that office, and who had the clearance for the R&D wing. The secret begins to unravel. not because of a dramatic confrontation, but because of the silent witnesses who simply saw something out of place. This is true not just in fictional thrillers, but in real life. History is filled with cases cracked open by the most mundane observations. It's a powerful reminder that every action, no matter how small or secretive, creates a ripple. And someone, somewhere, is always watching the water. The janitor, the delivery driver, the person at the next table in a coffee shop. They are the invisible witnesses, collecting the fragments of our hidden stories. So the next time you think a secret is safe, remember the silent observers. They might not know what they're seeing at the time, but together, their pieces of the puzzle can reveal the entire picture. The truth is all. Weeks later, a change began to ripple through the quiet corridors of power, almost imperceptibly at first. It wasn't a public announcement or a press conference. Instead, it started with a series of letters, discreetly circulated among senior officials. These weren't grand declarations. They were quiet, internal communications, typed on official letterhead, sealed in unassuming envelopes, and passed hand to hand, or through trusted couriers. The letters themselves were masterpieces of bureaucratic subtlety, polite yet pointed, each one posing a series of carefully worded questions that carried immense weight. The primary question, the one that appeared in nearly every single letter, was deceptively simple. Who approved the access? It was a question that echoed in the minds of those who read it. On the surface, it was a request for clarification, a standard procedural inquiry, but beneath that veneer of formality, it was a direct challenge to the chain of command. It implied a breakdown, a serious deviation from established norms in a system built on procedure and accountability. Asking who was the first step in assigning responsibility and potentially blame. It suggested that an unauthorized action had taken place, and now the search for the originator was on. Another recurring question dug deeper into the procedural breach. Why were security protocols bypassed? This was an even more serious charge. Protocols weren't just guidelines. They were the bedrock of institutional security, designed to prevent the very kind of incident that had just occurred. Bypassing them wasn't a minor oversight. It was a flagrant disregard for the entire system's integrity. This question wasn't just asking for a reason. It was demanding a justification for an action that seemed, on its face, unjustifiable. It hinted at a level of authority or arrogance that allowed someone to operate outside the rules that bound everyone else. As these letters made their rounds, a palpable tension began to build. Every official who received one was forced to confront the issue. They had to review their own records, check their own logs, and question their own subordinates. The letters acted like a virus within the system, spreading a quiet panic. Who knew? Who was involved? Who was trying to cover their tracks? The very act of asking these questions in writing created a permanent record, an undeniable paper trail that could be followed later. This was a classic bureaucratic power play, a slow and deliberate tightening of the net. The secrecy of the correspondence was key. By keeping it internal, the authors of the letters avoided a public scandal while simultaneously applying immense pressure from within. It was a strategic move, allowing them to gather information and build a case without tipping their hand to the public or the press. The questions were surgical, designed to expose weaknesses and force those responsible into a corner. Each reply, or lack thereof, would be another piece of the puzzle. The silence from some quarters was just as revealing as the detailed explanations from others. This period of quiet inquiry was the calm before the storm. The letters were the first tremors of an earthquake that threatened to shake the very foundations of the administration. They were a signal that a powerful faction was now moving, methodically and relentlessly, to uncover the truth. The individuals who had initiated this covert investigation understood the system they were operating in. They knew that in the world of governance and high-stakes power, the pen, especially when it asks the right questions, can indeed be mightier than the sword. The answers to these letters, they knew, would ultimately determine the fate of those who had dared to overstep their authority. And so they waited, as their replies, denials, and deflections slowly trickled in, piecing together a narrative of what truly happened. Thanks for watching, and be sure to follow for the next part of the story. For years, it was a story that didn't exist. A secret buried so deep, it was practically legend. No official records, no public statements, just whispers in the darkest corners of power. But secrets like this have a way of clawing their way to the surface, And this one was no different. Years after the events took place, it started with a trickle. An anonymous source, a cryptic email, a late-night phone call to a journalist who had almost given up hope. The first reports were cautious, almost timid. They appeared in obscure online forums and the back pages of independent newsletters. There were no names, no specific dates, no graphic details. It was all couched in careful language, speaking of an alleged incident, unnamed individuals, and a failure of oversight. The writers were clearly terrified, testing the waters, seeing if anyone was still watching, still guarding the secret. For a while, nothing happened. The world seemed to ignore it, but the trickle didn't stop. It grew. Another source came forward, then another. Each one added a small puzzle piece to the larger, horrifying picture. The story started to gain traction, picked up by more prominent bloggers and podcasters who pieced together the fragments. They connected the dots, cross-referencing the anonymous claims, and what they found was a chilling pattern of silence and complicity. The story that emerged was no longer just an allegation. It was a ghost haunting the institutions meant to protect the public. It spoke of a profound betrayal, a moment when those in charge chose to look away. And then, it happened. A major news organization, one with a global reach, published a carefully vetted, deeply researched expose. They still didn't have all the names, but they had enough. They had internal memos, eyewitness accounts, and a timeline that was impossible to deny. The story exploded. It was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. Hashtags trended worldwide. Talk shows dissected every angle. News anchors, with grim faces, read excerpts from the leaked documents. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. It was a tidal wave of shock, anger, and disbelief. People from all walks of life took to social media, to the streets, their voices united in a single, deafening chorus. They asked the questions that had been suppressed for so long. Why was this never investigated? Who knew about this? Why was nothing done? The most persistent and troubling question of all was, who was being protected? The pressure mounted day by day. The institutions that had once been fortresses of silence began to crack. Spokespeople issued vague, evasive statements that only fueled the public's fury. Retired officials were hounded by reporters, their past denials now sounding hollow and weak. It became clear that this wasn't just about a single event. It was about the system that allowed it to happen and then conspired to erase it from history. This story is a powerful reminder that the truth can't be buried forever. It shows that even when powerful forces work to enforce silence, the courage of a few anonymous sources and the dedication of journalists can bring light to the darkest of places. The demand for answers is growing louder, and this time it will not be ignored. People are demanding accountability, not just for what happened, but for the years of silence that followed. The full story is still unfolding, and we will be here to follow every development, every revelation, until justice is served. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any updates on this crucial investigation. Thank you for watching.